Go on to, I think, the eighth secret. You all feeling the eighth secret about now? All right. And that is very important. It's called look for and understand light. Now, light, obviously, is an extremely important part of photography. But there's one thing to be able to get something well exposed. There's another thing to be able to either control light or the relationship that you have to your subject, which creates the mood. So, for example, here's an image that was taken at about 9 o'clock in the morning, and you can see the light is coming from the side because you see a highlight side on the boy's face, and then you see a shadow side, and the same thing with the mother. So you know that the light is coming in at an angle. Now, a lot of times when you have light that comes in at an angle, it creates depth and dimension, and that is what we're looking to create. If you wind up photographing everything with your flash, and it's this flash on camera here, let's say, and this little flash here is going to make really flat light because it's coming from directly the same angle as your lens. And so everything's going to be flat. Now, if you were able to take this flash off, or if you took another light off, then you're going to create dimension. So even if we look at these lights here on me, this is coming from the front, but it's a little higher than the flash, so you're getting some dimension. And then as I turn, now the light, these people over here will see a lot more modeling of the light because it's coming in from the side. So the angle of the light to the subject becomes very important on how we perceive things. So for example, this was taken at 8 a.m., about 9 a.m. of this subject. And in this case, I'm letting the light illuminate them. Well, what I did is I walked up the pier, and 2 minutes after I took that picture, I took this one. Now, what does this say? Well, the light's the same, subject's the same, photographer's the same, but the angle of the light to the subject and the angle of the photographer to the subject change. So anytime you change one of those three things, either the light or the subject or the angle that you are to the subject, then everything changes. So here, this has a completely different tone, mood, feel, even though it's the same subject and the lighting is the same. So I would urge all of you, if you haven't done this, when you start photographing whoever or whatever, is take a walk around whatever your subject is, and you'll start to notice that, oh, well, wait, from here the light looks much better. Because when I started in photography, I could see expression, I could see moods, but I wasn't able to really successfully see light. And I wouldn't know. I could say, well, yeah, this looks pretty good, but then I would take a picture like it doesn't look as good as it looks to me with my naked eye. And then you start to realize that, oh, it's because of the lighting. And so, if you can move your subject, use walls to bounce, there's all these ways to modify light in the real world. I'll give you another example. Here's an image I took of this boy. This was with the 28 to 75 millimeter lens at 2.8. I was happy with the composition, more or less. It's kind of the picture I wanted to take. The only problem actually is the lighting. And it's not that it's not well exposed, it's just that essentially he's being backlit. And the result of that is that we have, like, you see the lightness, and then you see darkness, and then you see lightness. Well, I knew that the light wasn't good, so I asked this boy if he would turn around 180 degrees, and then I took this picture. Now, several things happened here. One is that now it goes light, dark, light, so the pattern is more interesting. And perhaps even more importantly, you can see the catch light in his eye, right? And our eyes look for points where there's extreme contrast. And so where's the most extreme contrast in this entire image is right in his eye. So what's that going to do? That's going to make us, the viewer, connect much more with this child than with that child, even though clearly it's the same child. So, having that point there, and this is just by turning him around, 180 degrees. Nothing, again, same photographer, lens, place, all of this stuff. So look for and understanding light turns out to be an extremely important thing. that as you go out and about in the world and start to become conscious of these things and how it works, I can guarantee that your photography will improve. Now, sometimes you can also manipulate the light in different ways. In this case, you've probably seen those big shiny pop-up reflectors, right? Probably. If not, they have them here at B&H. I would recommend it if you photograph people. They're very handy. And they can add light. So in this case, you can see light on the edge of their hair, right? That's from the sun. So the sun is behind them. And then what I did is I have one of those shiny things, and you can see the catch light in their eyes, right? And that's from the reflection of the light bouncing back to them. So I was able to manipulate the light, and now it's almost like having two lights. One is creating that nice hair light, which is a separation, and then the second one is returning light to them. Because realistically, if I could have tried to just expose without that reflector, and I probably could have got an okay exposure, but then the quality of light would be different. And so no flash on that. All right, here's another example. The light is coming from behind her, but in this case, it's bouncing into a huge white wall. So to give you the scenario, if this was the white wall right here, then my subject would be right here, and then my back would be to that white wall. So you can find this outside on a sunny day. It's like in the middle of the day. Oh, terrible time to photograph, but maybe not. Maybe you can find places where the lighting looks great, and it's always there if you know what you're looking for. So taking advantage of large reflected light sources that just exist right all out and about. Here's another example. I was kind of happy with this. I like the drama to this picture here. However, his mother would prefer to see him. So in this case, I added some flash to that. And so you can see what we're looking at here is in this second picture, there's actually two light sources, because the sun, which was making this really dramatic rim light, still exists in the second picture. So that, if I had just had the on-camera flash without that sun, it would still be kind of flat. But because of that, now he has a lot more dimension to his face. But in this case, using two lights, one taking advantage of the sun, and the second, my on-camera flash. Secret number 9 is also sort of important, and I would urge you all to try this if you haven't before. Maybe you don't have to, actually. Maybe I can save you the trouble. But to understand how your camera works and how the latitude of exposure works, because I'm sure you've all experienced taking a picture and you're like, that's not the way that I see it. Well, partially it's because the camera doesn't see the way that we see. It has the ability to see maybe 10, 12 something stops of light, which is based on an amount. It's a halving or a doubling. And our eyes can see maybe 30. So that means we can be in this room and I can be looking out on all of you, and despite the fact I have a very bright light in my face, I can kind of make out most of you, because of that case. If you ask the camera to do that, that would be too bright, or you would be too dark, because the contrast, the latitude that you're asking it to capture is beyond what it captures. So what I did here was a little test that basically goes through over and underexposing the same exact scene to see exactly what it is that the camera sees. So for example, right now that says f8 at a 500th of a second. This happened to be shot at 100 ISO, if anyone really cares, but f8 at a 500th of a second. So f8 is the aperture, 500th of a second of the shutter speed. And next to that is a little 0. And there's a 0 there because that, according to the camera's meter, was the correct exposure. So I want to take a picture of this. The camera says, if you said it that way, that's what's right. Okay, that's what the camera says. So then what I decided to do is I underexposed it by 1 stop. Now, when I underexpose it by 1 stop, you'll notice in this case, it went from a 500th of a second to 1,000th. So by making the shutter speed twice as quick, I've added half as much light, and the result is 1 stop darker. And so that's what we get. And then I did it one more time. So if I was going to do it one more time, what would the shutter speed be? 2,000th. Very good.
Did you shoot it in manual?
I shot it in manual. And then I did it one more time. Let's say, what happens if we went 4,000th? And then just to go totally crazy, Yeah, at 8,000. So that's underexposed by 4 stops from what the meter says. But what we'll notice is that in the scene, the sun, being the sun, is still overexposed, right? However, everything else got dark, I think by about maybe 3 stops or so. This part actually is kind of looking nice if that's what we were only looking at that particular part. You can see how the saturation increases as things get underexposed. So if you've experienced photographing sunsets before and they looked washed out, well, this tells us that if we underexpose from what the camera says, then we're going to get more saturation and color. So something good to know. And then what I did was the opposite. So we started originally at f8 at a 500th of a second. So if I wanted to overexpose one stop by manipulating the shutter speed, I would go to 2/50th of a second. And so that was 1 stop overexposed from what the camera said was correct. Then I went 2 stops overexposed, 3, and finally 4 from what the camera said. Now what we'll notice at 4 stops overexposed from the camera's meter of the whole scene, well, this looks about right? So the camera is looking at all these tones and it's making an average based upon the light. But if this is the way we want our picture to look, our camera would know that. It just knows what it sees. So this, at least, then you can understand that throughout this, there's all of these different tones, and exposing for the part of the picture that's most important to you is what's important. So here's an example where the camera's meter would do an absolutely terrible job. Because there's so much brightness in the scene, it wants to make it darker because it doesn't know that there's this white that we want white. It just is trying to make everything this average tone, which in this case is not what we want. So that means if you have a lot of light or white in your image and you want it to look the way that you perceive it, then what you need to do is overexpose from what the camera's meter says it thinks is correct. So in this case, if I were to meter this scene and I took the photograph, it would be too dark. So I have to overexpose it because there's a lot of light in the scene. And then it looks the way that I want it. Then you also have the opposite, which is if you have a lot of darkness in the scene, the camera wants to make it brighter. And so by doing that, it would wash out all of that red color. So in this case, we have to underexpose it. So if there's a lot of dark things in your image, usually you have to underexpose it. A lot of bright things in your image, you overexpose it. And then you'll get the exposure for the part of the image that you're trying to get correctly. A little story about this particular image. I think for me, I don't mind spending time in Lightroom or Photoshop or these type of things, but the part that I like the most is usually taking the images. That's just me. Everyone can approach it differently. There's no right or wrong way. I mean, I'm assuming most of you do this because you like doing it, so whatever part that you like doing, that's the part you should spend most of your time doing. So in this case, I prefer to get it as best I can in the camera. Now, it's not to say that all of these images you've seen have probably been manipulated or tweaked in some little way. And there wasn't anything major. I didn't composite anything on any of these photographs, but there was some sort of something done to them from the original image to what you just saw, whether it was changing the contrast or maybe changing the levels or whatever, pulling out some detail from the shadows that you wouldn't have seen in the original image, things like this. And so in this case, I came across this, this was in Kyoto, and I came across this scene the night before this image was taken, and smart people travel with tripods. Just remember that. I, however, did not have a tripod. So I wanted to take this image, and there was no way I could take it because the sun had already gone down like way too far. And so the only way that I would have been able to take it the night before, by the time I got there, would have been take like 2 images, and one exposed properly for the sky and the other exposed properly for the lanterns. The problem is, without a tripod, trying to take multiple images from the same position is pretty impossible. As it was, I precariously balanced my camera on my bag at a cockeyed angle with using the self-timer, and I mean, it worked, clearly. Not the best way to do it, but sometimes, you invent solutions to problems that you have on the fly. So in this case, I came back the following night earlier. So the sun had gone down, but there's still some glow. So you can see like from behind how the clouds are slightly illuminated, and there's some blueness to the sky. If you got there much later, then obviously that light goes away. So, so it looks like night, but there's detail there as opposed to it being that black. So in this case, doing it right in the camera meant going back the next day. You can also play with certain things. In this case, you can see the blur in the background, right? And there's, she's relatively sharp compared to the background. And in this case, if you're willing to get on a tire swing with your camera and have somebody spin you on it, then you're very easily able to take this picture. Because when you think about it, like me relative to this girl, we're not really moving, right? Because we're on a tire spinning together. So relative to each other, we're not really moving, but relative to the rest of the world, we are. So right at about a 30th of a second or a 60th of a second, we're able to get, blur the background and keep the foreground sharp. Now, it depends how fast you're going, which is the appropriate shutter speed to get this effect. But, if you have someone spinning you at a good speed, you can create blur and have sharpness at the same time, just by that. And that also reminds me of the technique of panning. Is anyone familiar with the technique of panning? All right. In the technique of panning, you take your camera and you're following a moving subject, and you're usually tracking it and photographing as you do that. And what that does, again, it reduces the relative speed of whomever or whatever you're photographing to the camera. And so you're able to get clearer pictures by doing that. And sometimes you're also able to blur the background and have the subject sharp at the same time. So it shows this idea of movement much more effectively sometimes than freezing all the action. Because if you photograph a race car on a track at an 8,000th of a second, you're going to stop everything. And that car is there, but it just looks like it's kind of parked there. If you see some sort of blur or movement, then the implication is that it's moving. And so you're able to use those things to be able to make images a little bit better.